Thank you, B. We will now hear from Patrick Hannon, who is the director of the Human Smuggling and Trafficking Center. He will discuss human trafficking from legal enforcement and criminal enterprise perspective. The HSTC is an interagency center designed by law with a mission to provide multi-source and multi-agency data fusion and analysis to assist law enforcement and policymakers in preventing trafficking, protecting victims, and prosecuting traffickers. Patrick joined the center in 2017. He was promoted to the Senior National Intelligence Service in 2014, at which time he served as the director of the Mission Engagement Division. In this capacity, Patrick has worked directly for the Intelligence Community Chief Information Officer and interacted with stakeholders from across the IC to ensure that customers took advantage of advanced capabilities to generate new mission insights. So prior to his service within the IC, Mr. Hannon also served with distinction as a United States Air Force intelligence officer. As I did with B, I'd like to emphasize a few questions that you would like to think of as he presents. As we listen, you might want to keep the following questions in mind, but for later discussion in the session, but also later in the day. First, keep in mind that market mechanisms of supply and demand that are present in human trafficking. A market where we have, as part of the demand, the customers, employers, and recruiters. Also the push factors, poverty, crime, and politics that are present in human trafficking. Think about them as, are they present in violent extremism and in VE organizations? Are there any unique attributes that you can find in VE that drive individuals towards the victimization present in human trafficking victimization? And if so, is the effect the same? Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm super excited to be here today. When I first started talking with David about this, you mentioned that, hey, we want to have this workshop talking about combating human trafficking. And that alone, obviously piqued my interest given what I do. But then David kind of tossed in another aspect of it, which was, hey, we want to talk about not only combating human trafficking, but we want to talk about the similarities and differences between that and countering violent extremism. One of the things that was not covered in the lengthy bio there was, so just by way of introduction for me, I've been doing Department of Defense and intelligence community operations for the better part of the last 25 years or so. The bulk of my experience revolves around targeting operations, primarily in the areas of counterterrorism, counterproliferation, and now combating human trafficking. So this was, again, very appealing to me and something I'm looking forward in being engaged with you all as we discuss this topic further. So David mentioned earlier audience participation. So no time like the present. Let's get into it here. I would like to hear from you, based on that picture that you see up on the screen. What jumps out at you? Anybody?
Some are colored, some are black and white.
Say again, ma'am?
Some are colored, some are black and white.
Some are colored, some are black and white. What else?
They're young and pretty.
Say again?
They're young and attractive.
Young and attractive. What else? Ma'am?
They don't look like you're expected like lower class or like impoverished. People live like everyday suits or anything you see on the street.
Oh, good answer. Good answer. They look like everybody that you might see on the street. Yes, sir.
Men and women.
Men and women. Anything else? Yes?
All you can see is their faces. You can't see any of the background or context or what they're doing with their hands. Nothing, just faces.
Good. Good answers. I'm going to have to save a few of those for later because you guys actually took this a little bit further than what I was expecting. But the bottom line is in this picture, what you see is men and women, boys and girls, black and white, other ethnicities. And what does that sound like? It sounds like everyday society, right? That's who's being affected by human trafficking. So just make sure and kind of watch out for these biases of it's one group or it happens to one group or it's just immigrants or migrants coming over or whatever. Trafficking affects everyone, young, old, men, women, boys, girls, all ethnicities. I don't want to get too much into all the statistics because some of these things have already come up, but a couple things you might want to, a couple additional thoughts for you. When we talk about human trafficking, we often hear these words, high profit, low risk. So recently, as we were engaging with folks that are engaged in doing nefarious activities, we were talking to a recent drug trafficker. And that drug trafficker had migrated his operations towards human trafficking. And he was asked, why did you migrate? And the statement shouldn't be surprising, but every time I hear things like this, it just kind of rocks my world. The statement was, because I can sell drugs once, but I can sell people many, many times. And it's the gift that keeps on giving. So there was some stats that were tossed out earlier. The one I didn't hear was, and this was one that came, and maybe David mentioned it, I'm sorry if he mentioned this, but one of the ones that came from the recent ILO study was more or less the total cost across the globe. $150 billion industry. I think the number earlier I was tossed around was 20 to 25 million. We generally put estimates between 20 and 30 million victims per year. Per year. Don't forget that one. About 600,000 to 800,000 being trafficked across our borders every day. And while you do see this picture, which shows kind of everyday society, we have found that trafficking does disproportionately affect women, children, addicts, runaways. Those that generally are in vulnerable situations. So David talked earlier about origin and transit and destination locations. So I won't belabor this a whole lot, other than to say that there's probably two interesting things I'd point out on this slide. One is obviously you have folks coming from relatively disadvantaged countries and moving towards more affluent countries. The other point, which might not be as readily known, is those that are involved in the recruiting and those that are involved in the transit. This one actually caught me by surprise when I first got involved with combating human trafficking. And more often than not, what we're finding in people that are involved in the transit are those that were from the original origin country. So there's there's a US person that's perhaps moved to Latin America, and they generally become those that are the recruiters of moving folks from the US into that country for the purposes of human trafficking. So basically doing it to their own people. Another little surprise for me when I got involved in human trafficking was, I used to think, hey, I live in the United States, can't possibly be happening here. The bottom line is it is. It's happening more than you know. This graphic is an unclassified graphic. It comes from one of the fabulous NGOs that we work for called Polaris. I'm sure many of you are probably aware of them. This graphic does not show cases per se, like specific cases that we think of and talk about from a law enforcement perspective of human trafficking, but it shows where there is known or suspected human trafficking that's occurring. Not surprising, so this is called a heat map. Not surprisingly, you see the hotter locations being more within the areas where you would expect greater amounts of transit, great lines of communication, and of course, as it moves in towards the center of the country, it becomes less and less. That is a theme that we see time and time again. Comes into areas where there's high tourism, really great transportation, great facilities, great opportunities, and then the victims get moved throughout the country into key locations. I'm not going to show, I'm going to go ahead and pass this just in the interest of time. All right, here we go again. What do you see here? Audience participation time again. They do look like mugshots. Some of them are mugshots. So in the interest of time, again, I'll keep this moving along. But I like to show this graph and I like to show it in correlation with the other one. Because the other one, obviously you see all walks of life. Don't you kind of see all walks of life here too? On the previous one, that represented victims. On this one, these are those that are doing it. Some of this stuff is shocking when you look at this. For example, you see folks that you might expect, but you also see a few others. Salon owner. How about this one? Georgia minister and his wife. A Bible college head. Navy sailor. Candle store owner. Cheerleader. Firefighter. Real estate agent. These are all U.S., by the way. So one of the things that we try to do at the center, and I'll talk a little bit more about the center, is we're trying to figure out, what motivates these folks. What drives them to employ these tactics, techniques, procedures, and all sorts of things. Unfortunately, the main thing that we've been able to find more often than not is that they generally tend to be very motivated by greed. So I'm thrilled to be part of the Human Smuggling and Trafficking Center. We already talked about what our center does. So do want to just talk about a few things that we, not only the center, but we working across a large group of USG organizations, both from an intelligence standpoint, law enforcement standpoint, non-governmental organizations, government organizations. We are looking at these types of things. Transnational crime, there is an enormous emphasis on transnational crime right now. This is very, very high, all the way up to the President and his National Security Council. There's statistics, although I don't like to toss these out a whole lot, there's statistics that show that human trafficking is the second fastest growing crime among transnational criminal organizations, right behind drug trafficking. And that's catching up fast. So obviously this is a major interest area for us. We're also looking at trends and patterns, recruitment facilitation, travel patterns are significant. Obviously from a law enforcement or from an intelligence standpoint, the types of things we're trying to do is we're trying to find out who are they operating with, where are they operating, how are they doing it so that we can go ahead and combat and counter it. I wanted to leave my talk here with just some food for thought on a couple of things, and I just kind of threw these down on Sunday. I probably could have created a list of about 40 or 50 of these things, but yes, ma'am. So we have statistics, but how much can we rely on them? And this is why when I mention these statistics, I just would caution you to be careful about some of these statistics. We do believe that the numbers are roughly around what's being talked about. However, when we say that human trafficking is growing, is it growing because we're monitoring it more and because we have more information about it? Perhaps it already existed, and we're just kind of getting smart to it. Also, if it's all about the data, then why is it so difficult to share this stuff? And this is something where from research standpoints and from, there's a lot of other organizations that I would urge to be kind of thinking about this. I realize that data, often there's a lot of sensitive information in there, personal identifiable information in there. However, there's a lot of data that should be available that we could bring to bear against this problem. And so if somebody comes asking for data, please try to make those data available. Is casting a wide net the best strategy for combating human trafficking? Or should we focus on very certain set priorities? So if there's a nexus to drugs, terrorism, and other national priorities, why the discrepancy in treatment? So I mentioned earlier that I am previously had worked in the counterterrorism world. I still obviously interact a lot with my buds that do counterterrorism and counterproliferation. I can tell you that counterterrorism is treated very differently than human trafficking. Counterterrorism benefits from an incredible amount of money and resources and organizational alignment to help combat that problem. Human trafficking, when I joined this, I went, oh my God, human trafficking is 100 times the size of what we were dealing with in terrorism. And yet it's treated about 100 times less than what it should be. And so I'm going to hold off on that because I know we're going to have a lot more discussions on that. But there's some very interesting similarities, but there's also some very interesting differences here. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the panel chair.